Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the MP Sanders podcast. To start, I have a little bit of a cold going on, so I apologize if my voice doesn't sound as good as it should. But this episode's going to be a little bit shorter than the usual ones just because it's tackling a very specific topic, and that is Kratom and 7-OH. I'm going to talk about what Kratom is and what 7-OH is. I'm going to talk about the recent federal push to ban 7-OH and what I think that means for Kratom. So let's go ahead and get started with that. Seven OH has become a hot topic as of late. Not too many years ago, it was an obscurity even for people who regularly use Kratom often. But now it is being spoken about by some of the highest ranking officials in our government. RFK has made it pretty clear that he is ready to ban the drug on a federal scale. So what is 7-OH and what is Kratom? You can't learn about one without learning about the other. So Kratom is a tree that grows in Southeast Asia. It's a pretty large tree, can grow to be over 100 feet tall, and its leaves are usually chewed or made into a tea because it contains two primary alkaloids, one called mitragynine, the other called 7-hydroxymitragynine, which is 7-OH. Both of these drugs are partial agonists of the mu-opioid receptor. And what that means is that it activates the mu-opioid receptor, but it doesn't fit into the binding site as effectively as drugs that fully agonize those receptors. Examples of drugs that fully agonize those receptors are like morphine, heroin, and oxycodone. An easy way to conceptualize what this means is that a full agonist will turn the water faucet all the way on and into overload, and a partial agonist will only turn it about halfway on. So it's causing the same effects, but not nearly as powerfully. This is precisely why Kratom became popular in the US to begin with. Since it activates the same sort of water faucet, it can help treat stronger opioid and opiate withdrawal, and it produces similar positive effects. It is a good painkiller, it is great as a mood booster, it is simply a weak opioid. Tens of thousands of people have used Kratom and 7-OH to quit drugs like morphine and heroin and use them to quell the withdrawals while they're quitting. Again, that's the reason it became popular over here, and it's actually the reason Kratom was banned in some of the countries it natively grows. Because in some of these Southeast Asian countries, the government has a tax on the opium trade, and Kratom was pinching profits off of that trade. And in some of these countries, the ban literally led to the government cutting these trees down, because they grew everywhere and anyone could just cut off the leaves and chew on them and have this sort of opioid-like effect. I believe a similar motivation was at play in my home state of Arkansas. The doctor who first lobbied to the government to ban Kratom and make it a Schedule I drug here owned a rehab clinic. And I think once he became familiar with the pharmacology of the plant, he was aware that he would not have many customers that are Kratom users and that Kratom would have a very effective role in doing his job, basically. People who didn't have a ton of money to go to rehab without going into debt could just use Kratom to quell the withdrawals while they attempted to quit. And I think that played a huge role in why it was first banned in my home state originally. I can't prove that, but I can smell it. Kratom moved from this obscure plant that people could use to quit heroin to sort of mainstream popularity in around 2013 as far as I can tell. 2 years later, the DEA made an attempt to ban the drug federally, and that marks the first time in American history where the American people were able to prevent the DEA from scheduling a drug that they had targeted. Hundreds of thousands of comments rained in about people whose lives had been saved by Kratom and whose lives had been greatly benefited by Kratom, and the DEA changed their mind. That is one of 2 times it has ever happened, and the second time was more recently with a substance called DOI. That's really only an interest to scientists, but scientists did a great job of standing up to the DEA and preventing it from being scheduled, so that was a win as well, just not to the same degree, in my opinion. A few years after the DEA attempted to ban Kratom, the National Institute of Health appealed to the World Health Organization for a international ban that would have led to it being a scheduled substance in 23 different countries. Luckily, the World Health Organization, after conducting their study, said that there was not sufficient evidence of harmful effects to constitute an international scheduling ban. Now, the reason they have targeted Kratom so many times and are now targeting 7-OH anyone's guess is as good as mine, but I think we can look at what happened in its home countries as a good place to start. And now 7OH, again, it's on the chopping block from the federal government, and I'll discuss why. I think it starts as these laws tend to do with the abuse and simultaneous ignorance of pharmacology. It is true that 7OH is 13 times as potent as morphine. But as I said earlier, the effects are not as powerful with that water faucet analogy. So an easy way to conceptualize potency is that it's simply the weight at which activity begins. 7OH has a pharmacological effect on the body at a lower dose than morphine does, but no matter the dose, the effect is not as powerful as morphine or other full agonists. They have used this fun fact about 7OH to push the idea that it is a potent and dangerous opioid that your children will get hooked on and possibly die from, even though there is no evidence, like seriously good evidence, that people have ever actually died from this drug in the history of its use here in the US. Pretty much every death that has been assigned to Kratom was a polysubstance issue. They took Kratom with a drug like Xanax or other opioids or alcohol, and their body couldn't handle it. There have been very, very, very few deaths attributed to Kratom where Kratom was the only drug in the person's system, and many papers have compared that to something akin to an allergic reaction more so than a toxic effect of the drug. This attack on 7OH, in my opinion, is just the latest attack on Kratom, and if the government is able to federally criminalize 7OH, it will be a stepping stone to doing the same with Kratom. I don't think that's a crazy assumption to make, and the first reason is that 7OH is literally in Kratom. Usually it's in trace quantities, but those types of facts have never really been important to our government when it comes to drug policy. Now, the next reason I think this is going to happen makes me want to speak directly to Kratom users, because it is very disappointing and unfortunate that I have seen so many Kratom users come out in support of the 7OH ban. So let's make something crystal clear here. Every single time you use Kratom, you use 7OH. And I'm not talking about the trace quantities in the plant. Mitragynine is most likely a prodrug, which means itself is inactive, but its metabolites are what causes the effects. About 20 to 25%, that percentage is still yet to be completely ironed out, but the best guess right now is 20 to 25% of the mitragynine is metabolized into 7OH before it ever reaches your blood. So without 7OH, Kratom does not have calming effects, it doesn't have pain relief effects, it doesn't have mood boosting effects, it doesn't have anything that people love the plant for. So you people who use Kratom that are in support of this 7OH ban, you are shooting yourself in the foot, and I can't really get myself to understand why you would be in support of that to begin with. Especially given the understanding that you take it every single time you take Kratom. I think it's moral posturing more than anything, and doing that never goes well. It always ends up counterproductive. So keep that in mind if you are a Kratom user. You love 7OH. It's the only reason you take Kratom, most likely. So please stop pushing for it to be banned. And this metabolic process that I've mentioned makes RFK's comment saying, "Oh, we're not worried about the plant, we're just worried about 7OH," all the more stupid. What does that even mean? 7OH is in the Kratom plant. Every time you take the Kratom plant, you take 7OH. So what do you mean you're not worried about the plant? You're only worried about the plant if you're banning 7OH. Lastly, I want to pose a single question, and that is, who are these laws supposed to help? I'm having a really hard time finding someone who their lives would benefit if Kratom or 7OH were no longer accessible. And I want to ask that to the Kratom users who are in support of it too. Who do you think you're helping by advocating for this ban? Are we supposed to believe that there are so many 7OH addicts and people destroying their lives with 7OH that the only way that we can fix that is to federally ban it? I don't think so. I only think this is a stepping ground to Kratom prohibition. I don't think it's anything else because, again, who are these laws supposed to help? I've yet to hear a solid answer to that question. I just hear, oh, it's a dangerous and potent opioid. It's like, yeah, but no, not really. It kind of is, like it's certainly an opioid, but it's not very powerful. It doesn't have very strong effects. It is potent, which is great because we don't have to take very much of it to get these sort of weak effects, but it's not a powerful opioid. And I think the word that we need to be worried about here, or the measurement sort of, is the power of it. Because a drug like fentanyl is super potent and super powerful. And we see how that goes with people who don't know they're taking it. It's very easy to kill yourself with fentanyl. It is extremely difficult to kill yourself with 7-OH. Just to put into words how difficult it is, there are studies done just to try to find an average lethal dose in rats with most commonly used drugs. And it's measured in terms of the LD50, which means lethal dose for 50% of test subjects. There has never been an LD50 established for 7-OH because the rats just don't die. Even if we give them extraordinary doses that no human would ever consider taking, they just fall asleep and wake back up in a few hours. So this is not a lethal drug that we're talking about. It's a weak opioid at the end of the day. And I'm having a really hard time understanding who is supposed to benefit from this federal ban. So, wanted to keep this episode short. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Leave a comment, like, subscribe. Thank you very much.